Hi everybody, welcome to our collective worship. Well, how have you been this week? I wonder what you've been doing. Do you know what I've been doing? I've been making bread. I used to really like making bread, so I decided to try to do some more. I wonder if you've made bread. We need flour, don't we? Yeast, sugar, water. So I've had to get a big bowl and mix it all up together. Now the yeast I've got has to be active. What does that mean? Well, it means that when you put it with sugar particularly, or put it into your bread flour, if it's fast action, it will actually bubble up. That's what makes the bread rise. It's a very important ingredient in bread. Now, I've had to trust that yeast I've had in the cupboard for a long time will work. Well, do you know what? It did work. It worked out really well, and I'm going to show you what I've done. What do you think of this? Let me show you. Look at that. Can you see? You see that bread? And look how lovely and yummy inside it looks. Look at that. That's a bit nice, isn't it? Eh? I wish we could share some. It'd be nice with butter and honey, wouldn't it? Never mind. We'll soon be together again sometime soon, I'm sure. We just have to keep hoping and keep praying and keep safe. Well, I thought today we would look at another story about food, a very important story about food and about trust. How many of you know about Daniel in the lion's den? I bet a lot of you do, don't you? Well, I wonder if you actually knew about how Daniel actually got to that place of being in the den. You see, what happened to Daniel when he was a teenager, some Babylonians came along and captured the place where he lived. They marched into Jerusalem, the Bible tells us. He arrested the king and his court and took them back to Babylon. He told his chief officials, Ashpenaz, to pick out all the young men who could be trained to become advisors at the Babylonian court. Ashpenaz searched for teenagers who were healthy, good-looking, and the top of the class at school. He ordered them to be ready to set off for the court of King Nebuchadnezzar, far away. Now, one of those chosen people was Daniel. And he was glad that his three friends, best friends, had been picked too. And once they arrived in Babylon, Ashpenaz explained to them what would happen. The Babylonians were not cruel like the Assyrians, and the captives were well treated, but they had to be trained. I suppose in a way it was a bit more than school. They had to go to like university to train about all sorts of things: Babylonian culture, history, astrology, philosophy, so many things. And they had to make sure they passed all that so that they could then go on to be advisors. Well, Daniel did that. And he said, while you're training, you'll live well. You're to have the same choice food and wine that's served to the king himself. Now, in the Bible, it tells us, although Daniel and his friends were far from God's temple in Jerusalem, they were determined to be loyal and true to God. They didn't want to live a life of luxury, accepting special treatment from the king and making themselves his chosen people. So they decided to ask for a more simple way of life. You see, they were not going to be the Babylonian chosen people. They were going to stay true to being God's chosen people. And one of the things these young men knew was that they could trust God, and they didn't know whether they could trust the Babylonians. So what happened to the rest of the story? Well, please let us have a plain vegetables for to eat, Daniel asked Ashpenaz. We don't want the royal luxuries. I daren't do as you say, Ashpenaz answered. If you look pale and underfed, I'd be blamed and might be put to death. When Ashpenaz had gone, Daniel repeated his request to the guard who was in charge of them. Please give it a try, he begged. Give us plain vegetables to eat and water to drink, just for 10 days, then see how we look compared with the others. The guard agreed. Well, he did agree, because, of course, he would be able to enjoy the special rations set aside for Daniel and his friends, so he would be all right. Anyway, after 10 days, it says the guard examined the four closely, and he had to admit that they looked healthier, more full of energy than any of the other young men. So for 3 years that they were students, the 4 Jewish boys kept to their simple diet and stayed loyal to God and their own people far away, their own culture, those who were chosen, God's chosen people. So that's a lovely story, isn't it? But you see, that's how much Daniel trusted God. He knew that God would help him to get through those times. You see, Daniel was a clever young man and important. And many years later, when a new king took over, called King Darius, to rule the kingdom, Daniel was so good at his job and so trusted by the king that he was in line for a big promotion. Sadly, this made the king's other helpers jealous. Now, it's not nice being jealous, is it? Because it can make you behave badly. It can even make you get angry and start doing things that you really wouldn't do. Well, Daniel in all those years kept on trusting God. He'd rather trust God than trust the Babylonians because he knew God would always stay the same. And Daniel did many things to help. He even managed to show the king a great service. With the help of God, he helped the king understand one of his dreams. And the king, who was not a very nice king. And you know, if he couldn't get his own way, he would do horrible things. And because his officials couldn't tell him what his dream was, he threatened to do something very horrible to them. And that was including Daniel. So Daniel decided that, he better pray about this and see what he could do. And you know what? He saved the day and became one of the king's favourites. But Daniel always stayed loyal to God because he knew God could be trusted. And this was how the officials decided to make a trap for Daniel so they could get rid of him. The king's helpers knew that Daniel was a man of God who always put God first in his life. Anyway, one day, one of the men got very excited and said, I've got an idea. So he told his friends the idea. And it was a clever one, so they hurried off to the king. And of course, they did that awful grovelly thing, trying to sort of be nice to the king so they could get their own way. And they went like this. "O most noble King Darius, you are indeed the greatest king ever to live. We think you should issue a law that in the next 30 days, all people should bow down and worship you alone." Well, the king quite liked the idea. He puffed himself up in his throne and replied, "Very nice of you, and all quite true, good idea." "And," continued the men, "if anyone dares to worship any other god before you, should be thrown into the lion's den." So you see, that's how it came about. Daniel didn't stop praying. He didn't do anything different. He continued to pray by his window. He continued to pray 3 times a day. And of course, the men caught him. Well, they saw him because he wasn't hiding it. And of course, they rushed back. They couldn't get back to the king fast enough to tell him what he'd been doing. Daniel loved God. Daniel knew that God was always with him. He had a God who had promised never to leave him or to let him down. He knew it was right to continue to trust in God, and God loved Daniel and knew he could trust Daniel to stay loyal to him even when it got tough. So you see, Daniel trusted God all the way through, even up until that point of him being put in the lion's den. And I'm sure he didn't like going into the lion's den. I'm sure he must have been frightened, but he knew that God would help him in some way or other. And he did, of course. He knew that God will always be with him. And it was so good because sometimes in the Old Testament, God really had to do some most amazing and awesome things, just unbelievable things, to get people's attention, to let them know how good and amazing and powerful he was. And that was one of those occasions. And you know what came of that? Because Daniel went on praying, went on doing what was right, he trusted in what was right to do, then a load of old things changed for the better. You know, sometimes we have to trust to do the right thing, even when we might be the odd one out, even when other people might be jealous or might be cross or might call us names. But if we know it's the right thing, we have to trust ourselves to do the right thing, haven't we? Now, I'm sure you could sit and talk about all sorts of situations that you might get yourself into where you would have to trust yourself to do the right thing. And I would think you could do that, couldn't you? Maybe you could write it down. Maybe you could write down trust and write down, you know, like you do at school. T, what does that stand for? R, what does that stand for? Maybe you could have a try at that and see what comes out. See what you could do. And I would urge you to look at the Bible, the book of Daniel, and read his story. It's very interesting. Remind yourself about how much he trusted God. So, well done, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed this story that we've looked at, and I look forward to seeing you next week. So let's just finish with a prayer. Hands together, eyes closed. Dear God, thank you that you protected Daniel. When we are faced with difficult decisions, please help us to have the courage to choose what is right. Amen. Amen. Okay, boys and girls, take care. Lovely to be with you. And don't forget, Jesus loves you. And I think you're absolutely smashing. Keep on trying and working hard. Do the right thing. Trust in yourself too, to know what is right. And know that you can trust God. In your prayers, you can come to him and you can know that you can trust him to help you to find the right way when you've got a difficult situation. Take care. Keep safe. See you soon. Bye.